God speaks to man in vision. He brought us into this world called the world that is fallen for our good, that we may become completely individualized, even though we pass through hell to awaken as God. God was never more present than when he was absent, because God, who had dwelt among us in disappearing, dwells within us. God entered man and came with man. It's God playing the part in all this fabulous world of ours. And because he is invisible to our mortal eye, we think he's disappeared. No, he has never been more present. He doesn't dwell among us, he dwells in us, and goes through the entire drama until he awakens. And he who awakens in man was the one who created the entire form to begin with. But now he individualizes all of us, and we, the characters of the poem, become one with the poet who created the poem. But I cannot find the Christ of whom they spoke, and the one of whom they prophesied. They can't, because they're looking for him from without. And may I tell you, the play is taking place within man. It is happening in the depths of the soul of man. For his kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not of this world. The whole vast world was under my control. And I didn't do it with a motion of my hand. I did it by control of my head. I didn't stop it on the outside. I stopped the activity in me, and everything was done not there, but done in me. You are spiritual, and the being awakening is God. God's intention to bring forth something alive in us, which is himself, which he would call his Son. As the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. You and I did not choose to come here. We were like sleepwalkers. God subjected all men. You know who he subjected? He subjected himself. He sunk himself in us, and then subjected himself to disobedience, that he may awaken, had to pass through all the furnaces, that he may awaken as the being that he is. But in awakening, he brings us with him, individualized, and he and I are one. So God is giving himself to us as though there were no others in the world, just God and you, just God and I, no other being. And then we completely awaken. And when we awaken, we are one. And it's God. It's God playing all the parts. And so he subjected me, he subjected you, he subjected every being in this world. In the 8th chapter of Proverbs is something that has confounded all the wise men throughout the ages. And listen to it carefully. The Lord created me at the beginning of his way. I am the first of his acts of old. Before he brought forth the heavens, before he established the earth, before he set boundaries to the sea, before he did anything, I stood beside him as a little child, and I was daily his delight. It gives you so much to think about. They call this wisdom, yet it doesn't say wisdom, it says a little child. I stood beside him as a little child, that the Lord created me at the very beginning of his way. I am the first of his acts of old. I stood beside him as a little child. Now, no man that I have read unnumbered Bibles and interpretations of Bibles and the different exegeses in the world, and no Jew agree, but no one will actually accept it as the ancient scriptures stated, a little child. And yet, I know from my own experience, there is that little child, and it's everlastingly a little child, and it's only a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes. Was that what God created? Was that his initial act of creation? And he so loved it It was daily his delight. Is that what God buried in us? For we are told in the book of Ecclesiastes, God has put eternity into the mind of man. And the word translated eternity, which is elam, is by definition a stripling, a youth, a boy, a little child. He promises, I will actually bring forth from your body your son. He will come forth from your body, and I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he brings forth from me his first creative act, and when I see it, it's my son. But it was his in the very beginning of time, and it's my son, and in the beginning it was his, then who am I? You get it? If God has a son, his first creative act, these are the words, God created me at the very beginning of his way. I am the first of his acts of old, before he brought forth the heavens, before he brought forth the earth. When there were no depths, I was with God. Before he set boundaries to the waters, before he did anything, I stood beside him as a little child, and I was daily his delight. God sunk in us his first creative act. You awakened as God, a fully blown, eternal imagination. God put eternity in the mind of man. God's purpose is to give himself to man as that man, and that man as God. And the only way he can do it is to give that man his son. So no one knows who the Father is except the Son. That's what we're told in the book of John. No one knows the Father but the Son. Then he put that Son into my being in the beginning of time, when he detached me from the world of innocence, the world of love, and sent me through the furnaces of experience. And then when I was completed in God's eye, he brought forth his Son. In bringing forth his Son, he brought me forth as himself. And there I saw his Son, and his Son is my Son. Therefore God made me one with himself.
Whatever I do then for you, I'm doing it for myself. If tomorrow you needed anything and it's in my pocket to grant it, I'm only giving it to myself. If you needed a meal and I could grant it, I'm not feeding another, I'm feeding myself. So the greatest prayer in the Bible is the 17th chapter of John. The whole thing is a prayer. He said, Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory that I had with thee before that the world was. Before the world was, I had this glory with thee. Now glorify thou me with thy own self. He's asking the Father. And he reveals the name. He said, I reveal your name. I've told them your name. And the name he tells them is Father. And so he comes to reveal the Father. Now that you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I've been with you so long, and yet you do not know me, Philip. He who has seen me has seen the Father. How then can you say, show us the Father? So everyone in the world is moving towards that fantastic experience of being the Father of God's first creative act, which was his Son. And so if you are the Father of God's first creative act, then you are God. Now this is the great mystery. That which was created, and therefore had a beginning, by God's infinite love for his own creation, that is us, sinking himself in us, he transforms that which had a beginning into that which has no beginning. For God, in becoming us, we who had a beginning, when that which has no beginning possesses us and reveals his first creative act as our creative act, our Son, then we are beginningless. And then you will know that mysterious statement in the book of Genesis, and repeated only twice, once in Psalms, and then again in the book of Hebrews. And it's called Melchizedek. One who has no father, no mother, no genealogy, no background, no father or mother, no beginning of days, and no end of days, And Jesus becomes, he who was the first raised from the dead is made a member of the order of Melchizedek. So everyone is brought into a state where he has no father. He is father. He has no mother. He has no beginning of days and no end of days. Can you conceive of such love? Can you conceive of that infinite mercy that is God's? That he would take us, his created, and so fall in love with his own creation that he gives himself to it and shares his first creative act, which was his own begotten Son, and gives me as my son, his son, making me one with himself. And because he has no origin, I have no origin. What a fantastic mystery. I did have an origin. He created me. And yet, having been created, therefore having a beginning, he rubs out beginnings altogether. And then I become one without beginning. And all this is brought to pass by going away. Unless I go away, then you'll have no life. This is the secret, the mystery of life through death. The grain of mustard seed or the grain of wheat. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much. The mystery of life through death. So God, the seed, falls into us and forgets he is God and goes through that horrible mess that I saw in my vision. And it dies to all knowledge of being God. And in dying, it brings forth much. The mystery of life through death. I will go away and you'll see me no more. And they were very sad, because he who walked among them and dwelt among them now ceases to dwell among them, because he's going to now dwell in them. So they can't see him if he dwells in them. And so the visible presence of God disappears. And so he does not move them like an orchestra leader would move an orchestra. He dwells in them, and they can't find the author, they can't find the leader. And then they're detached by that entrance into them, and they pass through hell. But passing through hell is for a purpose, to awaken as God. You can forgive every being in this world, because you're forgiving yourself. So you really never helped another. There was no other. And all the imagery of the Bible is true. Every bit is true. Now listen to these words that comes in Blake's great Jerusalem. Blake would not sign his name to his poem Jerusalem, for he said he did not write it. It was dictated. And when he was questioned, he said the authors are in heaven. They are in heaven. They are not on earth. No one on earth aided him with the poem. And all of his other poems and his paintings, he signed his name as the author of the poem, signed it as the artist who painted. But when it came to Jerusalem, he would not sign it. He said he did not create it. It was dictated sometimes 20 lines at a time. And he said the spirit of prophecy, which is called Christ Jesus in the Bible, dictated it. Morning after morning he would wake to see the spirit of love hovering over him and dictating the words of this mild song. Now listen to these words. I behold the visions of my deadly sleep of 6,000 years, dazzling around thy skirts like a serpent of precious stones and gold. I know it is myself, O my divine Creator and Redeemer. And after this is dictated, then these words dictated. Fear not. Unless I die, thou canst not live. But if I die, I shall rise again, and you with me. Wouldst thou love one who never died for thee, or ever die for one who had not died for thee? And if God dieth not for man, and giveth not himself eternally for man, man could not exist. Therefore God dies. God dies by sinking himself in man. And then dying in that sense, he rises, but this time he rises with man, and man rises with God. So he who had no life independently of God's perception of him, now rises as God the perceiver to animate all things. So as the Father had life in himself, now he is granted to man, his Son, to have life in himself, and all rise.